Hi there, I'm James Dapachi, and this is Coffee and a Case Note. Team, today we're going to talk about a couple of companies and a unit trust, but we're sort of going to roll them all together and just treat it as one entity today. And what this entity does, in essence, is buy land, build buildings on it, and sell those buildings. It's a property development venture. And we're going to deal with some of the relationships between some relevant people in the background of this venture. So let's get into it. We've got the plaintiff today who's coming to the court. And what the plaintiff is asking the court for is to say, hey, I want to wind this venture up, or I want to wind up these two companies and appoint a receiver to the unit trust, but we won't get into that too deeply. And I want to do that on the basis, firstly, of Section 461 of the Corporations Act, that it would be just and equitable for a liquidator to be appointed to these companies and for them to be wound up. And then in the alternative, or alongside that claim, a wind up pursuant to Section 233 of the Corporations Act, that the way the company, speaking in the singular, is being run is unfairly prejudicial to the members of the company. And what happens is the plaintiff succeeds, just to give away the ending. So let's dive into the facts here and figure out what's happening. Right, we've got our plaintiff. Our plaintiff is a natural person, and they are a director of one of the companies. They're a 50-50 shareholder of the other company. We've got our defendant. They're a natural person as well, flesh and blood. And the defendant is the director of both companies, so the sole director of one of them, and the co-director with the plaintiff of the other company, and is a 50-50 shareholder in both of them. And now what happens over time is that the defendant takes a real practical, front-facing role in relation to the venture. And interestingly, the venture is really backed by the plaintiff's parent, the parent in the literal sense, as in someone who assisted them, with life coming into the world. And that parent has loaned a significant amount of money to the venture in order for the plaintiff to become a shareholder and to kind of be on the tools in a quasi-partnership relationship of trust, where the plaintiff's parent hope is that the plaintiff is going to get in there and really learn the property development game by being there on the tools, being a part of seeing it happen. So we've got the plaintiff's parent who's given a lot of funding. We've got the defendant who's sort of the real face of it, the real energy, the real experienced developer. And we've got the plaintiff who's in there trying to learn how it happens. Now over time, the plaintiff takes a less active role, although the plaintiff's spouse gets engaged in the process for a while. But in essence, it is the defendant who's really driving the venture and progressing the direction it's heading in. Now, the challenge for us is that over time, the defendant begins to cause payments to be made from the company, essentially for the defendant's own benefit. Some of those payments made are, the term sometimes used is parked, causing some of the company's money to be parked in the defendant's own offset account in order to cause interest to be a smaller amount in relation to the defendant's home loan, causing payments to be made to third-party entities for undocumented and unclear reasons that are not well explained. The defendant buys himself a car without any permission or explanation for doing so. And in essence, there are all these problematic transactions going on. And it is essentially those problematic transactions or that problematic conduct that leads the plaintiff to bring this application. Now, alongside that, we have evidence of some other challenging factual issues, including an application made in VCAT, the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal, where very similar to a court where parties have disputes between themselves. And in essence, what the evidence showed was that an application had been made in VCAT and neither the plaintiff nor the defendant caused it to be defended. And so the companies, whichever the relevant one was, lost because essentially they couldn't manage it properly. There was other evidence that tax had not been paid for 5 or 6 years, that proper records had not been kept of either company or the trust. There was finger pointing going along, but there was particular finger pointing coming from the defendant, but there was also finger pointing at the defendant on the basis that they had breached their director's duties in relation to the causing of these payments to be made, purchase of the car, the failure to keep records, the failure to pay taxes, failure to resist the VCAT claim. And so alongside all this, we have also some pretty toxic WeChat messages being exchanged between the parties And one of them, if you'll forgive the language and a bit of a trigger warning on this, is that the defendant threatens that they are going to fuck to death the plaintiff's spouse, which is an upsetting message, and it's clarified in the form of a curse apparently being delivered. But we have this relationship, and what the plaintiff says is this relationship evidences a deadlock, it evidences a breakdown of the relationship of trust and confidence between ourselves, and so it should be just and equitable for the court to appoint a liquidator to wind it up. In the alternative, or alongside that, the plaintiff says in relation to corporate oppression that this is unfairly prejudicial to the members of the company, all this conduct, and so it's appropriate that the company be wound up. Now, in short, the defendant resists that and essentially says, no, everything's fine, let's not wind up this company. And also says, hey, this is an abuse of process. The whole point of the plaintiff bringing this claim is so that some other entity related to all this that's borrowed money, which I'm a guarantor, can succeed. And the plaintiff's really using this case you and I are talking about today to apply some pressure in relation to another piece of litigation. The court was not particularly impressed with that submission. The defendant didn't make it out to the court's satisfaction, and so the court did not find it was an abusive process. What the court did find, as I mentioned at the start, was that it would be appropriate to appoint an independent, objective liquidator in the context of this terrible documentation, in the context of all the tax debts, in the context of allegations of breaches of director's duty flying around left, right and centre. Get an independent liquidator appointed, in they come. And so that is the order that the court made. Now, just as a little interesting footnote, what we saw today with the appointment of this liquidator was that similar facts gave rise to a basis to appoint a liquidator, whether pursuant to section 461 of the Corporations Act, just and equitable, or whether pursuant to section 233 of the Corporations Act, unfairly prejudicial to the members of the company. So, an interesting one today. Hope it brought you some value, and I look forward to chatting again soon. Cheers.